So, who in your family has had dementia and or Alzheimer's?
Okay, so to this point, neither of my grandparents on either side have had anything. It's actually talking about my father now, who was diagnosed with something called MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, 4 years ago, which is sometimes deemed as the precursor towards dementia and Alzheimer's. In those last couple of years, he's actually started to deteriorate, and given lockdown, has not actually had a formal diagnosis, but he is heading towards the direction of having more dementia symptoms.
So it's sort of
So we're in the preliminary.
precursor.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So well, when did you hear about these news about well, not these news the start of it, should I say?
I think from a nursing background, there were certain things that I saw in my dad that became visible. I think having worked with in elderly care, you sort of tend to see things a little bit more. So it was little things like forgetting words at the end of sentences, couldn't find the right word for something. A lot of people put them into age categories. They get, they're sort of over 70, that kind of thing. But it became very regular, and he was getting very frustrated with it. Simple things like making a cup of tea became
A lot more difficult.
yeah, just everyday stuff. The stuff that my dad's a relatively intelligent gentleman, had a nice career and retired early because he was able to. And it was just little stuff that started to show that we noticed more as a family. I think when you're not living with the person, it becomes more noticeable. So that would have been, well, as I say, he was diagnosed 4 years ago with MCI. So probably a couple of years prior to that, we noticed things were starting to change.
So when you first, obviously saw it, and like you said, you have a nursing background. How did it sort of make you feel? Did you, already know it was coming, so you kind of took it a lot more like a more flow type, or was it just sort of?
I'd like to think I'm quite a pragmatic kind of person, and I'm aware that things, as people get older, aren't going to be as clear as they always will be. And people age differently. There are 60-year-olds who are absolutely amazing and doing everything, and it's never a problem. And then there are 60-year-olds who will sit and in a rocking chair and knit, the typical nana type.
Yeah.
I've seen all of it in some ways and in lots of different forms. How it made me feel was the fact that I knew that something was starting to show, and we just needed to keep an eye on it. As I say, there was nothing in my family history that we were aware of. Our family are relatively long livers as well, because my grandparents lived to 92 and 102 on my father's side. So it was just something we needed to keep a note of as to whether or not it was a stress-related thing or something that was becoming a little bit more visible, that was going to become a problem, because he'd suffered with stress-related stuff in work situation.
So,
You can ask any questions you want, I don't mind.
you should, all right. With advice, to maybe other people who may have other family members, or they may know someone who, has it, what advice would you give them?
Okay, so my advice would be, if you start to see that something's not quite right, is to keep a diary of activity. So if something's happening and you think, you can sort of let it go once or twice and think, they've not slept particularly well or something like that. But if it starts happening on a regular basis, and there's little things that you notice, keep a diary of events. It doesn't have to be anything major, but the more information you've got down, the more you've got to take to a doctor with them, or point out to them that things are starting to go wrong, although they're not always open to stuff being pointed out to them. My dad definitely was not one of those people, and it's taken a very long time.
So yeah, you said you have a nursing background. So have you sort of seen it before with other people? Then I assume.
Yeah, I used to work in. I've worked in nursing homes. I've worked in elderly mentally infirmed units, is what they used to call them, and I always think it's a horrible situation. But there you're looking at dementia cases who are not safe to be at home. So to give you an idea, the unit I worked in had people 50 plus in it. 50, yeah. So there was several patients that were in their 50s that were showing. So these are patients that have got to the point where they're not safe to be at home with their relatives, because they either turn violent, or they've just got to a point where their relatives can't cope with them because things like the incontinence side of things, they've lost the ability in some cases to actually swallow correctly, and just generally their general demeanour is just something they can't stay at home with. So yes, I've worked in those facilities. I've also worked in elderly care, so wards on hospitals that are deemed as elderly patients and parents of other people and stuff like that. And there are so many varieties and so many things you can look for. It's an incredibly difficult disease to diagnose. Because what do you put down to age and what do you put down to something else? And also finding the funding for things like this is difficult.
Yeah. That's the thing. So it's me, like, just not like to your father or like anyone, but have there ever been like a point where maybe you played a particular song or maybe you played a film or anything, and maybe they were like a lot more calm or something?
So Dad's not been one of those people who's had particular music. He's never really got the albums out and put albums on or anything like that. Last Night at the Proms has always been a big thing in our house, and he's always very calm on that evening because he knows what's coming. We've always had the radio on in the background. It doesn't matter what music plays. He's always had the radio on. But Dad is much more of a gardener, and if he starts to get a little bit fraught, because that's how he sometimes gets himself into a bit of it, it's like an anxious bundle. It's probably the way I think about it. Talking to him regarding gardening is something that's on what I can grow in particular seasons, and can I put this in and should I be doing this? I'm pulling back information from 30, 40 years ago when he was, he used to grow all our vegetables as a kid. That's where his information is coming from, and that's what calms him down when you take him to a subject when he can talk about fluently and he will not have to struggle to find the words.
So would you say gardening has helped him?
Yeah, gardening has been a big thing throughout my dad's life anyway. As kids, we weren't particularly well off, and usually half to a third of our garden at the house that we lived in was always turned over to a garden. We were always encouraged to garden with him as kids. So there was nothing better than picking peas off straight from the pod, and popping them straight in your mouth. I don't like them cooked, I love them straight from the pod.
Yeah.
But Dad never discouraged us from anything like that. And talking to him about those times when we were small and just generally asking his advice where he becomes the expert makes him feel useful without him realising he's actually doing it.
So yeah, with the nursing side, was there any point with different people that you also played? Did they have a particular hobby, and like someone had a particular hobby in that home which they did, and maybe they got a lot more calm and stuff? Was there any situation like that, if you could remember?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously with the broad range of dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff, different things trigger different people and calm people down. The homes that I worked in, we used to have regular once a month music nights, and there was a lovely old couple that used to come in with their organ and sing. Sing. Yeah, the lady was probably older than half the residents who used to come in and sing. Warble might be the better word, but it was songs that they remember from their childhood. So yes, they used to come along, have a fish and chip night that used to be delivered from the local chip shop, and sing along and have fun, and they visibly calmed
down.
Yeah, the ones.
Yeah,
the residents that used to walk round and round and round and round because they didn't know what to do with themselves. Used to come in and sing along and be different people. Tell them they'd start telling you about what they used to do to songs that they were hearing, whether they went to a dance with their partners or husbands or children. Yeah, we used to see that as well.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. So
that's all right.
Thank you so much for this. And
yeah.